Hey, before we get started, I would like to mention that this video will contain a couple spoilers for Undertale, Deltarune, and a tiny bit of one-shot. Nothing like lore related, but mainly sprite related stuff. I honestly know only two people of which that this will actually apply to, but I just wanted to mention it. Hello, everybody. It's Deanspillabean back on your screen. And today, I'm actually going to talk about a bunch of the Veadotube projects that I've been working on over the past couple months. I've learned quite a lot about this program over the last couple months, and I just want to show off the stuff that I've made. Starting off with, I actually kind of want to show off this little GIF that I made in part using Veadotube. Now, I know Veadotube is supposed to be for like PNG tuber avatars or VTuber avatars or models for avatars so that you can do stuff for YouTube. But honestly, I think there's a lot of potential in this program in order to make animations like this one right here. The code in order to get this to work actually isn't too big. I basically have a couple GIFs down here that cycle between up and down of the individual sprites for the little Niko Roomba. And then to actually like command where everything needs to go, I actually have a thing where I have a little origin point here. You can see a little dot. And that is actually what these sprites are following and attached to. I can actually go check up here. You can see up above me, origin point is connected to the layer. Each of the different GIFs are connected that way. Now, as for how it actually goes to one point and then ends, I have a branch on selection up here that whenever the clock ends, it then has a new waypoint for the origin point up here to go to, which is what all of the GIFs are attached to. And after each cycle, it shifts over to a new position, which is then connected to a smooth modifier so that it moves the origin point smoothly so it can actually go to each location. Now, what was the point of going through so much effort to make a little GIF like this? Well, actually, I made this little, let's see, there it is. Look right there. There's little Niko. I got a little Niko just like walking around now. It's kind of cute. Though I will admit, actually getting the GIF in the first place was a little difficult and kind of roundabout. But you can actually use this as a way to program in specific animations, which you can then put into different programs in order to make these kind of GIFs. So what I ended up doing was going into a scene and having the program play the scene out, full screening that, so that whenever it outputted, it can actually go to... Can I actually get it to show up here? I'm curious. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got two of them now. But you can see one of them is basically a GIF that I can make wander around. Or not really a GIF, it's more like a transparent one that's running around. Should be here in a moment. There they are. I then took the recording into DaVinci Resolve, which does have a export as GIF option. So that way I could actually get it as a GIF, but it doesn't get rid of transparency, which is why I use another program called Aseprite. This is basically a multi-layer sprite program that's used kind of for animations, but I use it in order to get GIFs set up. Anyways, I can click play, and as you can see, it's actually playing every single one of the frames, and it's on its own little GIF, which I then export, and of course, add it to my desk of many things. Look at them go. This was just a small example of the kind of stuff that I was getting into with this program. The rest are going to be like actual avatars that I could use in other videos. This is Flowey the Flower. He's from Undertale. And he actually is made up of a bunch of different sprites, or not really a whole ton, but I basically individualized the petals of his face, where I can do something like this and make him bald as an example. But also, if I disconnect him, he's now connected to my mouse. As you can see, the individual flower petals are actually moving around. Oh, kind of showed that one off. Oh yeah, he also has like a little flower little pellets that I can use. That if I press, I think this button. Yeah, there we go. There's like a certain key combo that I can use in order to split the flower petals off of him and can fly them around with my mouse, which I can then click. Now they hide behind him. There's also another toggle where I press this one, Alt and X. It allows them to kind of move around a bit, which is kind of... Honestly, it's kind of trippy, especially seeing how, like, as I move him around, he almost looks 3D, depending on where I'm looking at. He also does have a couple different faces, like this one where he looks a little bit more annoyed. This one where he's a little bit more worried instead. And I also have his like cursed faces where he looks a lot more evil, as well as the let's see, is it this? Yeah, there we go. The bigger face here. Where now he's even angrier, which actually does extends the petals below him, so it actually causes those to stretch. And everything's attached to the like other parts of the model, allowing them to stretch around and contort depending on where I look at everything. Honestly, I'm really happy with how this turned out. Even as a kind of fun thing, I can also press this button, and it forces Flowey to start doing this little dancing emote. Which, as you might have guessed, I actually turned into a GIF, if I can find it 1 second. There it is. And I added it to my shelf of many things, and I just have a little GIF of Flowey dancing around. He's vibing. Now, as for the code, we'll go under the hood here. If you've watched some of the streams that I've done where I'm actually working on the project, you might notice it looks a little bit different than what I had on the stream. And that's because I've been like rigorously cleaning the heck out of this thing. Because my first iteration of it was disgusting in terms of like where all the code was. Like, one problem that I have is how exactly do I control the different poses of my characters? Especially the ones that I use for my paper avatar, where normally in like a Veadotube Mini, sudden shift to the blue screen background. In order to get my paper avatar to actually work within this program specifically, I have about, how many states? Like 48 different ones that I swap between? About 48, yeah. And in order to do that, I have different combinations of Shift, Control, Alt, and a function key between F13 and 24, and allows me to swap between any one of these poses that I feel like doing. Well, of course, I need to memorize the positions of everything, but because I like made everything and I put everything in place, I've got a pretty good idea of where all of the different poses are. A couple of them still surprise me here and there, but I got a whole system set up. That's all that you'd probably need to know, really. Whereas in the full version of Veadotube, there is one option for doing something similar, and that is the state signal state event option, which I'm going to use this right here just as an example, where here you can assign different key options in order to trigger a specific state. Now, this does work in practice and in theory. The issue is that the projects that I get into require a ton of different states and poses to go into, because I don't use face tracking for anything. It's purely button combos and muscle memory. So this is my first iteration of having a whole control panel set up in order to swap between so many different poses easily. It basically comes to this one brain at the very top here that checks what buttons are being pressed. You can see each of them being highlighted. And then they go through this massive network of wires that get connected to each individual state pose. So if I click this button, for example, it'll trigger this pose. If I click Shift and then the same button, it'll trigger this one. Shift Control, and it'll swap between those. And that goes the same way for pretty much the entire setup. And anytime that I enable one of these, it will disable another one, which for the most part is all well and good, but as you might have noticed, this takes up a lot of space. And it's also very limited because if I wanted to add in extra buttons, I'd have to remake the entire model. So I wanted something different. And whenever I was making the Flowey model, I actually redid that entire setup and condensed that entire monstrosity of a thing that we saw earlier down to this. So how this works is I have different signal inputs based on the individual buttons that I use for my avatars. And if they are triggered true, then they open a gate, this gate down here, lets through a specific string value, which then goes to a state aggregator. What this does is takes the most active or the most rightmost string, which in this case ends up being like one string at a time, puts it into the storage bin and actually ends up combining it with either Shift or Control, depending on which one of those I press. And I also have a check on the side that if I press Alt or Caps Lock, it'll enable or disable the entire function. So as an example, if I press F19, it'll keep there. Go F20, F16, F15, and those are all being stored. There's also Shift 15 as well. And I also have a check over on the other side here that has all of the different button combinations available to me. So every one of the function keys with their shift control and shift control variants all being double checked and cross-referenced with basically the specific action or the string that I'm calling upon, which, if it is true, as in that it is a key binding that is currently not in use, it'll trigger this Boolean, which, as an example, if I press Control, Shift, and a specific button, you'll notice that that doesn't trigger. That's because that button specifically that I'm trying to press is F22, and if we go over here, F22, Shift Control F22 is still here, which triggers the equals Boolean, which ends up closing this gate over here. And whenever it closes, it actually ends up sending in what I'm calling the default pose, which in this case is F19. So now, anytime that I trigger a pose that doesn't have a specific key binding present, as in it's not using any one of these strings yet, it'll then just trigger a default pose, which allows me to not have a blank face. So as an example, if I bypass that entire check and tell it to go to F22, it now ends up with Flowey having a blank face, where if I press F19 as an example, or F22 or 20, which are being used, then it works. Some reason whenever I release the button, it also gets rid of the face, which very weird problem. But as long as I have that check enabled, now whenever I press any button that doesn't have a pose, when I don't have one that has a pose bound to it, then it'll just go into a specific default state, which is the F19 one. And last thing before we move on is the flower petals thing, which kind of a late addition from what I was doing, but it's still kind of a cool adjustment. Basically, I have a check down here where if I press F14, click, it'll enable all of these to come out. They go in and out based on these two branching booleans. Either they get connected to a wave function that is based on a point value, so they end up going in a circle, and all of the different petals are kind of their own sprites that are moving around, and their points values are adjusted here, and as well combined with the current position of the head movement. So if I'm moving the head around, as an example, the point of origin for all of the pellets will still follow the head around, which is kind of neat. And then every time that I press the button to make them go in and out, they swap between either their wave points or this 0, 0. And you can see down here the smooth options near the bottom is that they go in and out whenever I enable or disable the option. And then I have one more check on the side where if I press Alt and then the same button, then the pellets become disconnected and they start following my mouse instead. Which, if I press the button again, starts hiding behind Flowey. I don't currently have a way for it to hide, so every time Flowey goes away, it's still going to be there. But that's stuff to work on at another time. The next project I want to go over is one for the Roaring Night avatar project, which ended up being me trying to figure out how to do after images. Now, I have made a video talking about this project itself, but I'm going to say that this video has a few addendums to that. So I was able to get it to work, as in I can create after images of the main Roaring Night avatar, which does look kind of neat most of the time. I even have like different methods to swap between different after image modes as well as speeds, which this entire thing itself is honestly really cool. Especially if I get it to get into OBS. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, there we go. So you can actually see that the after images are following the Roaring Night pretty accurately and actually following them around pretty well. But you might also notice, especially with this pose, that some of the after images are going away. This is due to a clock issue that I had trying to get the images to show up at a correct interval. which unfortunately made me want to reconsider how I did the after images of the Roaring Night, because as you can see here, it is a little desynced, or with this one, it's very desynced. I end up fixing it a bit later, but I want to show the code of how I got that one to work, of which I did go over in that video, or at least like the fundamentals. But I basically have a single project. Let me see. I have a scene here that runs through 11 different instances of the project, and each of them have their own clocks to work on that are all set on different delays, which was already one of the main issues, because as soon as one of the clocks gets somewhat disconnected, I pretty much have to force a reset to work, and then even still, sometimes there's like little blips that there shouldn't be any space, but whatever, there was some issues with that. Each of the individual files, though, were really interesting, where I had a thing over here for the individual states to swap between. You can see near the very top, swapping between the different poses. And in doing this, I did end up developing a really interesting clock, because a problem that I found whenever I have a repeater timer, I put up a counter and I set it to repeat, I had an issue where, depending on how fast I was actually making this run, it actually would skip some steps, which basically, if I have this thing running too fast, it ends up skipping some numbers. So if I have that running at, normally it should like count up to 10 here, but sometimes it'll skip some of these numbers, which most of the time completely imperceptible, because no reason anyone should have a clock going that fast. My crazy brain was like, no, I need it. I need to figure out how to get this to work. So I ended up making an entire test bed system here in order to prove that I'm not crazy. We have a bunch of counters running parallel to each other, all of them on different values that they're counting up to. As you can see, they're all kind of working well at the moment. But if I tell it to go at 30 speed, sometimes, yeah, there we go. Some of these will start desyncing and not trigger. The problem that I've encountered is that if I wanted to get these to trigger like at the end of their cycle, as in after an entire cycle, they output a number, and then the number gets registered, and I basically say, hey, once this clock ends, trigger yourself. That's what I want to do, but repeaters have an issue where you just don't really know when they end, which led me to a couple of these other variants here. The first variant uses repeater, next one uses a clamp, so that whenever it reaches its max value, it then triggers a equal statement if it's equal to 60, because it's at the end of its life cycle. So it then triggers the counter to reset. And the last one is instead using a counter that goes up one step at a max of 2. So as soon as it triggers once, it then triggers the on value change node, which does mean that it doesn't count up any further than 0 and 1, but it is able to trigger a change between the two instantly. So if I tell it to run at 500 clock speed, you'll notice the Boolean delayer down here, that the one using the repeater does not trigger as often. The one with the clamp triggers more often, but isn't totally accurate. But the one that checks a on value change is practically instant, and actually updates like 99% of the time, something like that. So that ended up allowing me to develop this weird clock here, where whenever this clock is triggered, it triggers a statement down here that goes to a counter that counts between 0 and 1 in a thousandth of a tick intervals, which then controls the movement of the after images of the program. Basically, I have a whole check here in this module that controls the position of the night, and it actually is mode dependent. So this number right here, it's set at 0, which means that it's on the prime variant. But if I set it to 1, it then sets it to the after image mode 1, and that also goes for the different states, where I can tell it to go to mode 2, mode 3, and I can have a lot more control over that too, which is really interesting. So this movement module exports information, basically where the X and Y value of the current sprite is, and outputs it into a specific mode modifier, which then basically goes through some math that I put in, exports that out to not just the move mode module, but also the cooldown clock, which allows the whole system to have different variations of speed and modifiers of the after images. So if I go back to the scene really quick, reset this, you can see that the after images has a certain clock right here. If I click this one, they come out faster and also go out farther. If I press this button, they actually divvy out. They actually like split going up and down based on which frame they're on. Odds or evens go up or down, basically. So I have that much control over where the after images go. And then, of course, the fade out is also controlled by the clock, where the farther along the clock it goes, it gets that information and affects the fade out of the different images. It doesn't work if the mode is set to 0, but if the mode is set to 1, then it does work. So in this scene, we have the prime version of the sprite, which is set to mode 0. It goes into the program and says it is mode 0. And then it goes to each of the different Roy Knight avatar poses and says, hey, your pose is number 1, because that is what state that you're at. Or that's the idea behind this. In practice, this ends up being very, very laggy. Even if I move this around, you can see that it starts lagging a little bit. That's not even a visual problem. The Roy Knight itself also goes through a weird lagging issue. And I have to hold down a reset button just to get all of this working again, of which it will then reset itself and then get completely desynced and fail again. So, I completely redesigned this. Now, I will say the whole redesign of the Roaring Knight is still taking some time to get done, because I'm like trying to figure out different ways that I can manipulate some of this program. But I'm using the different pose control scheme panel that I showed off for Flowey for this. And instead of having each of the individual project files having their own clocks and different movement values that each of them have on their own, I instead did all of the actual code part in the scene itself, which you actually normally shouldn't do, because I think like editors are a bit more better at actually handling math. And I'm kind of worried if I scale this up too much, it might lag some more, but I haven't found a limit yet, so I'm continuing on for now. But basically, I have a different mode that I can set for each of these. It then also it takes some movement commands, which I don't have a mouse command set up, but as you might have noticed, the actual after images are connected pretty well. I have a clock down here, which is kind of a different clock than what I've used for the previous Roaring Knight avatar project, but it basically counts up in one step intervals up to 17. So whenever it reaches 17, it resets itself. And then it goes into the primary version of this. If I go over to the other guy here, it uses a bunch of object in and out connections where I get clock data that goes down to here. And none of this will actually be triggered yet, because all of this is pretty much in limbo until it gets information, of which I don't have a way for it to get information within the project itself. So I have to keep swapping between using one of these project files or another. So the kind of inputs that they get is what pose is being active, what position they're all in, the clock data just to know what clock rate they're at, the mode, and the frame data. So the different string poses are connected over here. So F19 will be triggered, or F20 will be triggered here, and that'll trigger different sprites. I can't trigger them here because I don't have the actual program hooked up for that, because I'm worried that if I hook up too much into this, it'll cause a lot of lag because it multiplies itself by 16 times. So all the different pose information is stored in here, and I have to make sure that I get rid of any of these key bindings if I use them in the main program. Then there's the positional data, and based on what mode that it's in, if it's in mode 0, 1, or so forth, it'll then go down here and basically say if it needs to be either an after image or a primary sprite, and then the clock here, when it's triggered, will go between point A and point B, where point B ends up being about 20 units to the right. So now if I set the go right value to 100, you can see that the main project causes the after images to have their trailing going much further than usual. You go back into here and set it back to 20. It will automatically get updated. I do have to make sure that I save every time that I do any of these changes, but I pretty much have to swap between the scene as well as the actual program itself in order to actually see if I could get this to work. But the payoff is I can also daisy chain all of the information to every single one of the after images, and I could effectively chain like an infinite amount next to these, and honestly it's not causing as much lag, and everything is so synced up because there's only one clock that every single one of the images are going off of, that I can actually have a whole thing on the side where I have like a whole doubled amount of after images. And if I tell it to move around a bit more, you can see that it's even more flowy than normal because I have 16 after images as opposed to 8. So I don't think I'll actually fully get the Roaring Night avatar to be working for a while because I want to work on reprogramming a lot of this so that, of course, I make a not as laggy version. But already, I don't even need a restart button for this. The previous version had to rely on a restart button to do a lot of stuff. This one doesn't, and I like it. Also, how the after images know which frame that they're on. I have a thing down here, frame data. Frame data equals a+1. Whenever I get one frame, it goes to the next one. I can actually check the frame output here. You can see that this one equals frame 2. This one equals frame 3. This one equals frame 4. And this continues on and on and on and on and on until the very last. And the reason why that's important is the clock system that I have set up actually checks for if it is equal to its current frame. So if I check that out, because it goes up to the number 16 and restarts, and then it checks what frame it's on, that way, whenever its number comes up, it knows it's the next in the sequence, and then it gets displayed on the final render. So that's how the clock is actually working now, instead of it being like meticulously timed only for it to go off course so much. Nope, this one just has one clock to work off of. The final model I'll be showing off, and I'm sure a lot of you know about this one already, is the one for Tenna. The Tenna Avatar project is one that I've been working on for quite some time. It has a lot of different flexibility with it. I can actually flip the model in order to go back and forth. I, of course, also have full control over where it is because it's also all bound to my mouse. As well, it has tons of different buttons that I can press for different poses. As well, this is also kind of weird, so bear with me here. I have different faces to swap between. So if I press Alt and then press this one, I have a different face. Different face, different face, and I actually can have up to 5 different faces to swap between. Not every single pose actually has different faces, though. Some of them just don't have one, or have enough room for some, but it does allow, for example, watch here really quick, I can change the different sizes of them. Whoop, whoa, oh, look, he's super tiny, and then I can press that, make him different too. Now, at least that is specifically with this model. I can change that around if I want, but I can. The main thing is that I have that much customizability on him for just one pose, and then I can have different toggles for him as well. If I go to, say, the blossom pose, I can then tell him to actually make there we go. We got a little blossom on him. I can get rid of it as well. Go to another different pose, different faces to swap between for that. I even have little dance GIFs also bound to him. And using the different face toggles, I can actually toggle between stopping them or moving them. Those are both options. And for all the dances, I can also make him go faster or slower, and that actually goes between in the individual dancing speeds. There's even this one cool option, and bear with me here, where I can pull out this foam gun. And I gotta turn around, go up to my avatar face, and then get sprayed with foam. Like, constantly. I'm getting sprayed with foam. Please help, I'm getting foamgrave. This one is by far the weirdest of all my poses because he just it makes a bunch of foam everywhere. This one was really difficult to make. So all the individual foam sprites actually have their own like bit of data that they work with. And I think there's like 24 different foam sprites that are here, but they basically have a number assigned to each of them and a different move and fade out command. So if I trigger, what's the trigger button? And trigger? Yeah, there we go. So I have a clock down here that whenever the value changes, it comes up here. All this does is actually makes all the different foam sprites come out randomized with randomized positioning. Each of them are then given information on where exactly I'm at any point in time, and then following suit, find the location that they should be spraying in, and then spray. They land in a specific area, and then they dissipate over time. So if I pull out Tenna one more time, whoop, and then I enter the spray mode, as so, and then trigger it with this button. I can then start spraying foam around, and every single one of the sprites goes to the direction that I'm pointing at and actually stays on the screen there until its number comes up again in the clock counter from earlier, which you can actually check here. So whenever I trigger this, it actually starts moving along. As you can see, every time that it gets triggered, this gets checked. And we can see in the display up at the top that as I'm moving around with it, all of the foam has its position stored and just works. Yeah, I'm able to do this goofy thing where I foam up everything. It's weird. It is my full intention to one day get every single one of Tenna's sprites imported into the program and actually make it work as a Veadotube avatar. Why? I just wanted to do it, honestly. I really like Tenna as a character over in Deltarune. I just wanted to be able to play as him a lot, because I just wanted to. That's kind of it. Realistically, it's also for different video projects that I have in the future, but those are for later. Right now, I actually just want to work on the program as much as I can. I believe I've been working on this for approximately 2 months? 1 month? 2 months. Some amount of months have been made used in order to make this thing. So, how this actually works? Well, I used the string control panel that I mentioned from earlier. I used to use the much larger button Boolean variant, but as I've mentioned, I pretty much made that one obsolete by upgrading to this variant instead. After some amount of time, I basically had to go through and update every single one of the pose options, as well as try to get rid of a bunch of different clutter that was coming up, because every now and again I just put too much into each of these poses, which ends up making it take up so much more space than it should. And I just need to work on making sure that I get as much space as possible, because otherwise, the program gets too big to figure out where anything is, which is a huge issue. But anyway, how this works, we get a specific pose here, which then goes travel along the red wire connected and goes to one of the many poses of the program. We'll just look at the default poses for now. That's what we're looking at. This may look like a massive mess of wires, and frankly it is, but this is what allows me to swap between this pose, this pose, this pose, this pose, this pose, this pose, and did I have any? No, I think that's all the poses. There's like 5 different ones for that. The different heads are also changed here, where, depending on what mode I press, if I press this one, we go into the awkward mouths. This one goes into the angry or mad mouths. This one goes into the normal mouths. And I have it set up so that if I have pressed one that doesn't have a head group assigned to it, it'll just default to the normal one. But how do I get this information? Well, for that, we'll have to go all the way over to the mic module down here. That's the microphone. Yeah. So we got a microphone in that gets registered into this massive conglomerate of information checking. I handmade and meticulously changed every single one of the values here so that now whenever I speak, different syllables will be detected and accounted for. And depending on, personally, my entire judgment of what I sound like, what my voice sounds like while I'm doing stuff, it basically just modifies how stretchy I get in different ways. And as you might have noticed, the actual Tenna model as I'm talking, it stretches up and down, left and right, depending on how I talk. I also have a check here where if I press Alt and C, actually causes every single one of my models to go in reverse, allowing them to swap between like which side that they're being portrayed on. And it goes for pretty much every single one of them, and also flips their scaling to, oh geez, whoa. Some of them I need to work out the kinks. But regardless, that allows me to have a wide variety of different poses that I can have for my character. As opposed to having numerous amounts of poses for different directions, I can actually just change the direction of them a lot better, which I think is really useful. There's also a check on the side here depending on how much I'm talking, and depending on the loudness, it rates it on a scale of 1 to 4. 1 being that I am not talking, at least. So when I'm not talking, then it goes into the mouth state 1. Then it basically just scales up, where the 2 is the first talking head, 3 is the next, 4 is the next after that. Now, it doesn't get to 4 very often unless I get notably louder than normal, which is all checked here. And in order to change the different mouth poses, I have this little thing checked up here where I probably want to change it again at some point, but this is what I got working. You basically just say, hey, I want pose this one, and then it has the pose ready. I want this one, I want that one, this one, and this one. The different scaling options that I have here, not just for talking, but also for either rotational effects or all the different head sprite states, all of those are universal. Every single pose is affected at the same time. Anyways, all that information gets stored in these two relays down here, which has the different talking levels as well as which emotional states that I have set up, as well as the different talking scaling. Now, the reason why I have the talking scaling here, even though the talking is universal, is for each and every one of these poses, I actually have a little module set up in the middle here that, depending on how much I'm talking, I can actually reduce how much is coming out. So if I were to change this to 2 as an example, which would effectively double the volume effect, then go over into my base model, you might notice that I'm a little bit bigger. This one's normal. This one's a little bit bigger. A lot bigger, actually, or at least like a lot more squishier. So then I just go back into this, set it to whichever variable that I want. And then, depending on what I like, it's just what I like. Another thing that I have set up over here is whenever a pose is triggered, you might notice that the different poses actually squish up and down. In actuality, none of the poses swap immediately. Every single one of them is on a 1/10 of a second delay before they actually swap between a new pose, unless it is within the same group. Where I have here that these poses that I am using currently are all bound to the same group, which you can actually see down here. If any of them are on, then it activates this group. If I go off of that group, it then goes over to this module and basically shrinks them and allows the next active to grow. If I were to enable, say, this pose as an example, save that, you might... Geez, I look really cursed. Ew. Okay, so as an example, once I go off of this point pose, whoop, he stretches up, but if I go to a different pose, you might notice that he's gotten smaller. I basically have this for pretty much every single one of the poses that I have access to. So, every time that I swap a pose, it just kind of changes depending on which one of the different modifiers that I want. So, those functions all go for pretty much every single one of the other poses. One other pose that I have been working on is one for the battle state, where I enter this mode and I can kind of just be here. But you might notice that my frame rate drops rapidly, and then once I go back, I actually start moving around more. Why? I don't know. For some reason, whenever I go into this pose mode, I get incredibly laggy. So, I've been looking into trying to make this one a lot better. Here's a sneak peek on stuff that I'm working on for this pose specifically. Are you ready? Behold! A project that is not quite done yet, but I'm just going to kind of show off something that I'm working on. So I'm looking into figuring out how I can rig up a bunch of different parts of him. If I disconnect that, I'll be able to move his torso around. I still need to kind of connect some parts. But if I were to hide his arm here, you might look at the hips down here. Move that around. You'll notice that the different hips and leg ligaments are connected to the torso. I still need to definitely get a lot of this actually connected, and it's still a work in progress project. There's still a lot of this that needs to be done in order to actually make it usable, but I'm hoping to get this done as a project at some point where I actually fully rig up all of the different key points that's connected to the individual limbs and get them to work and have a fully simulated dynamic Tenna avatar body thing, which I can just play Street Fighter with. I don't know, that's like a big option. Uh, I don't want to talk about this a whole lot because I'm still trying to figure out if this is even possible. But if I can get it to work, then I could potentially get him to literally just walk around on his own 2 feet and then have all the feet dynamically react to hitting the quote unquote floor. And also his whole body interacting with just hitting the ground, coming back up, like reactive type. Yeah, looking into this will also definitely be something that won't be finished for quite some time, but know full well it is something I'm working on. So those were a bunch of different Veadotube projects that I've been working on over time. I hope some of you really liked looking into some of those. I do want to get more into the project itself, as well as at some point trying to figure out if I can somehow offer my services at some point. I'm still figuring out the details on that. So if you have any ideas or suggestions on either what kind of avatars that I could work on or projects I could look into in the future, comment those below. Or if you have any suggestions on how I can make some of these Veadotube projects better, frankly, be my guest. I'm trying to figure out this program. Any help really does, help. Or alternatively, if you got any questions on stuff, feel free to message those in the comments too. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. I also try to have different streams where I work on my Veadotube avatars. Okay, at least with the week that I'm posting this, I'm working on some other projects at the time. But whenever I have any streams where I work on my projects, you can stop by there and see what kind of crazy stuff that I do. Other than that, I think I'm just going to end off the video. This one's already too long. All right, thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed that, at least some amount. And you all have a good night. Bye.